So when we talk about alimony or spousal maintenance in Illinois, which really is the term, we used to call it alimony, but in Illinois already for decades we call it maintenance. There are several types of maintenance, right? One is, and really I should say that any details of maintenance fall under this general penumbra of maintenance, which is to make sure that either party or really both parties are okay after the divorce. In other words, that they can sustain themselves, that they have enough solvency, that they're not going to be crawling back to court asking for more help, or that they're not going to have acrimony, all kinds of issues with their ex after the case is over. So that's sort of the earmark, right? And when we talk about the details of maintenance, we talk about a number of different factors. There's a dozen some factors that the court looks to under the statute, under Section 504 of the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act. And one of those includes, for example, the standard of living of the marriage. So the court is going to look to how did they live? What was the typical day in the life? Did they go out to eat? Did they eat at home? Was there a nanny? Was there a maid? Was there somebody cooking food for them? Was it just the wife or husband as the homemaker and the other was working the majority of the time? All these things speak to how did they live during the marriage and what would be likely to happen after the marriage, with an eye to maintaining that standard of living that was held and regularly had during the marriage. So there's a number of factors that the court's going to look to, a dozen plus factors, as I mentioned, that the court will use under Section 504 to determine this maintenance amount, right? Some of these include, as I mentioned, the standard of living of the marriage, but also tax consequences. Also, who's going to receive the majority of the property distribution. So if one party receives much more of the property than the other, and that is like a nest egg that they can live off of for years to come, then they won't necessarily need a monthly maintenance payment. Also, you have tax consequences as an important consideration. And then the court's going to look to what is the res of the marriage overall, what is being distributed, with an eye to both marital and non-marital property. It's just a fancy way of saying how much does the divorce court have on the table to distribute during the divorce process. Also, the court's going to look to the behavior of both parties in the litigation process. So if one party hid assets, for example, or was not forthcoming with discovery, they didn't lend themselves to a deposition, for example, then these are things that the court can use to penalize parties in the process to award a greater maintenance or even property award to the other party. It is permitted to modify alimony after divorce. One has to show a substantial change in circumstances. One has to show that, for example, the other party absconded with funds during the marriage, that there were monies that were not revealed, and this shows a greater entitlement to a monetary award subsequent to the divorce. Or that there are greater earnings than were anticipated, or there are greater needs than were anticipated. These are possible ways to go in and reopen a prior maintenance award. However, it's often not easy to do this, which is why it's important to make sure that during the divorce process itself, one gets the greatest possible maintenance amounts that they should be receiving. So alimony, or what we refer to as maintenance under the current statute, is regular in Illinois for marriages that have lasted several years. For example, if there's a 20-year marriage, we're going to have permanent maintenance almost always if there's a disequilibrium in the income of the parties, okay? Because maintenance exists in order to ensure that there's a level playing field, to ensure that both parties really are capable of sustaining themselves after the marriage. So if we have a case where one party has a much greater income or greater assets than the other, then maintenance almost certainly is going to be awarded to maintain that standard of living during the marriage and ensure that the party that has less income is going to have the wherewithal to sustain and support themselves for years to come. This was about understanding alimony and maintenance in Illinois. If you have any questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to reach out. There's a lot of facts and issues and law that's complicated here. It's important to have at least that free consultation, and we're available here to do that for you at KHK Law.